So let me turn to the room at this time. If you would like to make your own comments or make your own reflections or add, this is the moment to also have a chance to have a conversation with Kanayo. We have mics that will come to you. If you give us an idea, please raise your hand, tell us your name and institution. And I'd like to begin with Kevin right here.
Since the mic was close to me, I'm the Kevin Cleaver that Kanayo so generously referred to. It's on. Yeah. It's just my voice. It's my voice. And I'd just like to add an anecdote. Julie was very nice in citing, I think correctly, all of the innovations that Kanayo introduced. But the one that I recall, having worked for him for 8 years, as most controversial was agriculture as a business. I think it was about 10 years ago that he personally pushed IFAD, which did not have that mindset. IFAD was more of a charity. I'm going to get to that in a second. To think of agriculture as a business. And I recall the day in the boardroom, the board of shareholders, the countries. I'm sitting next to a couple of representatives here. They weren't there at the time. And he's quite correct. Some of them were very antagonistic. And some of the staff were antagonistic. And herein lies the paradox, which I want to get to. The people who are running these institutions, not just IFAD, but the World Bank, many of the bilateral aid agencies, and the NGOs that work in this, have a very liberal ideology of charity. We're transferring money from wealthy countries and wealthy people to poor, destitute people. It's a charity. It's welfare. And the mindset was, and still is in many of these institutions, that you provide free goods. You're getting people who are starving, essentially, something to eat. Food aid is more important in terms of volume than what IFAD does with its finances. And agricultural projects were mechanisms to distribute free fertilizer or subsidized seed, subsidized credit, foreign, often European or American technical assistance to tell these people what to do. But it was well-intentioned. That's the paradox. And the people who sit on the boards of the institutions like IFAD come out of that charitable mindset. When they heard Kanayo saying, that doesn't work, it's not sustainable. Once our subsidized fertilizer and seeds and subsidies go away, our projects fail. And in fact, when we both came to IFAD, the data from IFAD's own material suggested that over 50% of its projects were failing. They weren't sustainable. As soon as our money and the technical assistance went home, the projects disappeared. And quite frankly, that is the history of agricultural aid all over the world. So what he was saying, in a sense, was let's make this work sustainable. Let's get rid of the charity element. And that's the paradox. With charitable funds, let's help these people become businesses, even small-scale businesses. And I certainly bought into that completely. And I have to say, he gets full credit. Other people worked on gender issues, other people worked on some of these other issues, but he was the inspiration for that. I thought it was fundamental. But the amount of resistance to it can't be overstated.
If I just quickly add to that, well, by the way, Kevin was associate vice president for programs, the largest department that actually implemented our portfolios. I think realizing that, as you just said, that rural people are not just looking for handouts. They're looking for economic opportunities. The last field visit I did 6 weeks before I left IFAD, I kept traveling anyway, was to Malawi. And I will not forget this, because I went to a field, a woman, and she was so proud, telling me how she moved from half an acre to 4 hectares. Now she was growing soybeans, maize, and what have you. And in this place, they have Mwati, M-W-A-T-I, Mwati Farmers Association. They had a warehouse, and they were showing me their bags and bags of maize from the last season. And people were coming all the way from the capital to buy their maize. They had formed a cooperative within 4 years. Mostly women, 52% women. And they were giving out prizes on that day when I was there. It was amazing. What does it tell us? That once they have the opportunity, they want to make money, like any other business. And what our business was to invest in them. providing them these opportunities. With that little money we had, I can give you examples in Ethiopia, wherever. Another one was in Mozambique. And Kevin, you will like this. Have you ever heard what is called a multi-purpose submersible pump? Do you remember that? Multi-purpose submersible pump. I said I have to say this. Big name. It's just a borehole. Yeah, but wait a minute. It's just a borehole. A community of about 370 living 2 kilometers radius from where one of these boreholes was put. It's a borehole, 40, quite deep, huh? Almost 40, more than 40 meters. Anyway, they have a solar pump that pumps water to 5,000 liter reservoir tanks. So they have, and what it does, by the pump itself, by the borehole, they have about 1/4 of a hectare where women can grow vegetables. Another 20 meters away, they have a laundry where they can wash their clothes, or this kind of cement things they make, 8 of them. Then they have 200 meters away, they have where the cattle come to watering hole for cattle. So they have water all year round. They have drinking water. It was analyzed. They have a chemist who checks the water every week. One of the purest water ever in that community. Now you can imagine, each borehole cost $24,000, and it was completed in 2 years for 370 people in that community. Do your calculation. It comes to less than $4 a month per person in that 2-year period. Investing $4 a month, less than $4 per person in a community, transform their lives. They have drinking water, they have water for their garden, they have water for their laundry, they have water for their cattle. It's a multi-purpose borehole. $24,000.
Kanayo, this is a mindset change. It's not just the transformation, it's a transformation of the mindset. I saw several hands up, and Kanayo, if you will allow, let's take from several of them, and because I know they also want to share. I'm sorry, I will go first to the Sayunchal, to Jay, who was just there, and then to the lady over there, and then we'll come to this side.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
I ask all of you to be relatively brief.
Yeah. Sir, you mentioned 2 important points, that small farmers for business and also the lack of institutions. Now my question is, small farmers also have to compete in the same market where large corporates and big farmers are competing. Now what are the 3 institutional arrangements which you feel are essential to make small farmers competitive in the same market in front of the large or big farmers?
Thank you very much, Vijay. Vijay is with UPL. And then there was a lady right here in the middle of the row.
Hi. Thank you for the talk. It was really interesting. My name is Ruby. I'm a student in agriculture and agricultural economics and about to finish. I was really interested to hear about the reverse migration, and I'm wondering how you talk about the case of China. How do we implement it in Africa? And also, how do we get rid of the stigma that comes with going into agriculture? I, for one, was one of the person that said I will go into agriculture, and coming from an African family, people will ask you, oh, which university do you study in? And you say the name of the university, and people look super excited because it's a great university. And then comes the question, what do you study? And you say agriculture, and the room becomes silent because that's not a career choice. You cannot do that. So I'm wondering, how do we get rid of that stigma to actually encourage people to go into agriculture, and maybe people from the rural slums, and even anybody from the rural communities to actually, from the urban communities to actually migrate back to the urban land and to go into farming. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me come now to Karen on this side. Yes.
Karen Brooks, I'm at IFPRI. Kanayo, thank you so much. Many thanks for all of the contributions. For agriculture to be a successful commercial business, there has to be a strong scientific foundation. There are many other things that are needed, but I want to focus on the issue of science. One of the things we do in IFPRI is track the investments in agricultural research among many countries, but specifically in Africa as well. And what we're seeing there is, despite all of the commitment to the science agenda for African agriculture, and despite moderately increased investment in agricultural science, it's just not enough. There's a kind of a train wreck heading down the road, which is going to mean a crash of a lot of hopes and expectations with realities of scientific backwardness. And what, in your view, can be done to put the science agenda and investment in agricultural science in Africa back on track?
Thank you, Karen. Kanayo, will you permit me to take the last one or two questions, and then we give Kanayo a chance to respond? Suresh, your hand was up, and then Cheryl, your hand after that.
Thank you, Kanayo, for a wonderful book and wonderful answers to Rajul's questions. In the beginning, I was thinking about three things to ask you: leadership, governance, and institutions. You answered leadership and institutions, but governance, you've not answered. Maybe you want to try that. You talked about Malawi, and if you take the last 5 years of Malawi's economic history, corruption has been the one that has pulled it back so badly. Now Malawi depends on humanitarian aid, eroding all the 15-year back development that it has happened. So I want to talk about that, but also the capacity issue. We are asking youth to go back to rural areas, but they go back and fail because their capacity is not there. And few people fail, and immediately others are saying, no, that's not the place to go. How do we build capacity sustainably in Africa for agricultural development?
Thank you. And will you pass, Suresh, the mic to Cheryl, just in the same row as you?
Thanks, Cheryl Morden, formerly IFAD. Mine is a comment rather than a question. I appreciate, it's wonderful to have you here. I like Julie's lead off because it was such a good reminder of the extent to which your messaging and your way of capturing the issues and the challenges have influenced the global policy agenda and dialogue. And hearing you here today, your message is, if anything, fresher. It's lost none of its passion in the last few months while you've not been president. And what I know is that Washington isn't your favorite place to be. So I'm only rising to appeal to you that you would keep Washington on your agenda on an ongoing basis, because I think we need to continue to have your voice here.
Thank you.
Here. Can I maybe ask you to give your response?
Yeah, I will try to be I will try to be. Is it on?
No.
Oh, okay, yeah. I will try to be brief. It's difficult to be brief. What I didn't talk about small farms and how they can be competitive. One thing that IFAD did very well and continues to do very well is organization. I think one farmer growing 1 hectare cannot compete with a big farm of even 10 hectares, or not to talk about 1,000 hectares. They have to be organized. And one thing IFAD does very well is this farmers organization. It's the only institution I know that has an annual event, Global Farmers Day, where farmers from everywhere in the world come to IFAD. It's always back to back with the governing council meetings. So if farmers are organized, they are powerful. The example I gave to you about Mwati in Malawi, I'm going to come back to governance eventually, is what happened in Ethiopia, in my own country, everywhere, in Bangladesh, in India. So they have to have an organizational structure. What is just women's group? But better if they can evolve into a cooperative and become an SME, a small medium-scale enterprise. And then it works. And then linking them up with the private sector. And the private sector doesn't have to be the big private sectors. They could be just small SMEs also. They have to have those linkages. And that's where IFAD is an honest broker, because IFAD is trusted by everyone. The farmers, the companies, the private sector, governments and politicians trust us. And our member states also. I believe they still trust us. We'll see the outcome of the IFAD 11 consultations by December, whether they still trust us. I see John over there. Great. So I think that's going to be key. Organizing farmers, into cooperatives, they become very powerful. Alone, they cannot do it. And I think PPP, like what IFAD introduced, the 4 Ps, is putting the emphasis on the 4th P, because the traditional PPP is public-private partnership. But public-private producer partnership is going to be key. And this is another approach that IFAD started a few years ago. So that's the answer. It doesn't work always, but it does in some cases. I mean, I can give you stories in Sao Tome. Have you ever tried the cafe, what is it called? The chocolate from Sao Tome and Principe. It's one of the best chocolates you could ever find in the world. They now have a chocolate factory, the first ever in the African continent. Well, sub-Saharan Africa. Well, this is not. Well, it's not in the continent. It's outside the continent. But anyway, I think that's key. Is organizations. In case you're not aware, there's a movement already of young agricultural entrepreneurs, and they're called agripreneurs. And they started off in 2012 when, again, thanks to Kevin, we challenged the youth, what we call in Nigeria, the youth corps, youth corps, who were working at IITA, one of the international centers like IFPRI, and what they were going to do after they finished their youth corps. I challenged them to get into agriculture. Now they are building themselves into agripreneurs, and they're taking loans from banks, and they are providing large quantities of corn, maize, soybeans, and even yam flour and things, selling to governments and to supermarkets. IIT has done a good job here because they have agripreneurs in Zambia, in Tanzania, of course in Nigeria, in DRC, a few other places. And the point is, if you go and say you want to start a business yourself, they may not listen to you. And I keep suggesting to youth, get yourself together, form a little cooperative or something. IFAD has supported a whole lot of youth activities, whether it's the CORI, the CORI, and there are many others. Where so if you go into the internet, you'll find a lot of youth organizations now in agriculture. And in 2015, they had the regional workshop in Africa in Abuja, and we had 300 of these young people coming together from practically all African countries. And I was amazed at what they were showing. They were showcasing what they were producing. One guy, I can't remember his name now, he got a little grant from IFAD. He started off with 4 beehives. By the time he came in 2015, he had 40 beehives. And he proudly sent us an email a few weeks later. Guess what? His bee has received authorization for export into Europe. That is the standard. You see, he knows he has to meet that standard to be able to get certificates to export to Europe, the European Union. It works. Let them laugh at you. You see, if you ever just think that the yam that you are eating, the cassava flour that you're eating, the rice that you're eating, and so on and so forth, they don't just come from supermarkets. They come from a farm. Somebody is producing that food. And you can make money too. Until the day that you drive your Mercedes from your farm. But I can assure you it works. Karen, I don't think the issue is so much as whether the science agenda itself is not working. It's lack of support. You know, I can tell you this, and when people argue whether science and technology will ever work in Africa, I said, of course it will work. The point is that we have not been able to convince farmers to use existing technologies. And for the simple reason that they do not see profit. Why do they not see profit? Give a farmer a seed of corn, maize, that will give him 4 times his current yield. He plants it, very good rains, the prices crash because the market is overflooded. There's no price guarantee. Policy agenda. It's not the absence of policies, it's the implementation of the policies. If there are no price guarantees by government or anybody, why will they produce maize the next year? When farmers are not, the average African farmer today is using 18 kilograms of fertilizer. That's the average in Africa, 18 kilograms. 46 kilograms India. 90 kilograms, Latin America average. 5 to 6% of all agricultural land is irrigated in Africa. 5 to 6%. Compared to what? Sorry, fertilizer is not 46 percent in India. 120. I mean, it's incredible when you think about it. And the scope for irrigation is huge. Inland valleys are bound practically everywhere in Africa. And how many African farmers are using improved seed varieties, high-yielding seed varieties or hybrids, but perhaps in maize? Existing technologies are not attractive because farmers have not been able to make money out of a business that is a money-making business. I want to be asking ourselves, how can we translate that science agenda into action on the ground? How can we get ministers to see that it's worth investing? With climate change, that maize variety is going to crash. They need a new maize variety. Science can add more nutrition to our soya beans, to our millets and sorghum. There's technologies there. I think we have a responsibility also. And when ministers of agriculture are scientists themselves, like we saw in Aki Adesina, then he knows what he's talking about. Very quickly, I'm very interested in the science agenda because I strongly supported that agenda when I was at IFAD. Governance, I thought I referred to government. When I said that the oil doesn't feed anybody, only puts money in people's pockets, that's about governance. It's corruption. No, that frankly speaking, you know, I mean, if you listen to the news, sometimes I can't believe it. The number of Nigerian ministers who have houses in Washington, in New York, and in London, and so on and so forth. It's a daily. You know, the founders of Africa, the first republics of Africa, Nkrumah, Nnamdi Azikiwe, Herbert Macaulay, and so on and so forth. They had a vision, they had a dream of an independent Africa. Those who came after them did not have that dream, and that's where we began to slide back. You know, if you just remember that in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, no single African country was a net importer of food. Actually, there was a period when India was a hopeless case. That was how it was described. Brazil was dependent on food aid. 1 million Chinese died from famine. That period, not one African country was a net food importer. Actually, Nigeria, Ghana, South Africa, Ethiopia sent forces to South Korea and sent some aid as well. Today, at the turn of the 2000s, Brazil, China, India, South Korea give aid to Africa. What went wrong? Leadership. Leadership. Corruption. My country discovered oil, and it lined the pockets of politicians and crooks, while millions suffered in poverty. They never cared. They turned a blind eye to it. Rule of law was destroyed. Greed and corruption took over. And so the young people today want to make that money yesterday, and they fall in line. But few of them are disgusted with it. And they say, this cannot continue. What is the legacy for our children when they come? And I ask the same question. What's the legacy for my own grandchildren when they come? So how do we build capacity? We have to have models. Leaders that are models. Leaders at all walks of life. Not just the president alone, but even along in the parliament and so on and so forth. So our youth can look up to them. We need honest businessmen and women that our children can aspire to. Big names that made money in a clean way. That is going to be a revolution. And it's going to come. It has to come. Because Africa cannot continue to waste its potential.